Ever watch a flock of birds, like
No.
moving all together? It's mesmerizing, like they're reading each other's minds or something.
Right. It's like a perfectly choreographed dance, but there's no choreographer.
Exactly. But there's got to be something guiding them, right? Some hidden structure.
Well, you're thinking like a systems thinker already. Turns out, that same kind of invisible framework, that system, it underpins everything. Traffic jams, the stock market, even how our own bodies work.
It's kind of wild when you think about it that way. And speaking of thinking in systems, you've asked us to take a deep dive into Donella Meadows' book, which is called, well, Thinking in Systems. So we're going to unpack how these systems work, why they behave the way they do, and what it all means for us.
It's about to get real.
Yeah.
Once you start seeing the world through a systems lens, you can't unsee it. It's like suddenly understanding this hidden code.
Totally. But before we decode everything, let's start with the basics. What exactly is a system and why should we even care how it behaves?
Okay, imagine a bicycle. You've got the wheels, the handlebars, the pedals, the chain, all separate parts, right?
Yeah.
But it's how they work together, how they're connected, that makes it a system. And that system has a purpose, to get you from point A to point B.
So it's less about the pieces themselves and more about how they fit into this bigger picture.
You got it. Meadows actually uses a really clever analogy to explain this. Think of a bathtub. The water in the tub, that's a stock. It's what you have at any given moment. The faucet and the drain, those are your flows, which control how that stock changes over time. Makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So the water level's always in flux, right? Going up or down based on what's flowing in and out. But why is this distinction between stocks and flows such a big deal? Seems kind of basic.
It's the foundation, because it reveals how systems actually act, and often how they trick us. You see, stocks, they tend to change slowly, like trying to turn a giant cruise ship. Flows, on the other hand, they're much faster, more agile.
Okay, so if you're only fixated on the stock, on what's happening right now, you might miss those bigger trends, those underlying currents that are actually shaping the system.
You're getting it. It's like that saying, you can't manage what you don't measure. But even then, you have to be measuring the right things. And to make things even more interesting, these systems aren't static. They're constantly adapting and changing because of these things called feedback loops.
Feedback loops? Okay, I've definitely had that term thrown around, but honestly, it always sounded a bit, I don't know, technical. What's
hmm
the simplest way to understand how these loops make systems so dynamic, so unpredictable?
Picture a snowball rolling down a hill. As it rolls, it picks up more and more snow,
Wow.
getting bigger and bigger, right? That's a reinforcing feedback loop in action. Change in one direction just amplifies itself, which can lead to rapid growth,
Yeah.
but also to rapid decline, like a market crash, for example.
So it's like once it starts rolling, it's hard to stop, or it can even spiral out of control.
Exactly. Now, on the flip side, we have balancing feedback loops. These are like the steady hand on the rudder, always trying to maintain equilibrium.
Okay, so like a seesaw trying to stay level.
Perfect analogy. Think of a thermostat. It kicks the heat on when it's too cold and shuts it off when it's warm enough, always aiming for that sweet spot.
So if I'm getting this right, reinforcing loops are like the gas pedal and balancing loops are the brakes. That makes sense. But if systems have these built-in mechanisms to self-regulate, why do they still seem to throw us curveballs all the time? Why are they so hard to predict?
That's the million-dollar question. And Meadows outlines a few key reasons why systems surprise us.
Okay, I'm all ears. Lay it on me.
First off, we humans, we're hardwired to see events, not the systems that create them. We focus on the what's happening, but not the why behind it.
So we're stuck in the moment, blaming that one slow car for a traffic jam, when it's really the whole system, right? The volume of cars on the road at that specific time.
Exactly. And our brains are wired to crave simple cause and effect relationships. We like to think if A happens, then B will follow in a straight line. But systems are rarely that straightforward.
Right, right. It's not always that simple. So what else makes systems so tricky?
Systems are nonlinear, meaning a small change can have a huge ripple effect.
Okay, so like that butterfly effect idea, a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and it sets off a hurricane in Florida. I always thought that was just a cool saying.
It illustrates a fundamental truth about systems. It's rarely a single isolated event that causes chaos. It's the complex interplay of factors, often over a long period of time.
And here's the kicker, even if we could grasp all those factors, systems have built-in delays that mess with our perception.
Delays. You mean like lag time between, say, turning a ship's wheel and the ship actually changing course? Precisely. The consequences of our actions, or even our inaction, They might not be felt for months, years, even decades.
This is starting to sound a bit, I don't know, doom and gloom. Like we're at the mercy of these invisible forces. But Meadows wouldn't leave us hanging without some hope, right? There's got to be a way to at least somewhat navigate these systems or even anticipate some of these surprises.
Absolutely. And that's where things get really exciting. Meadows doesn't just want us to understand how systems work. She wants us to understand how to make them work better. And a huge part of that is, well, recognizing the common traps we fall into.
Traps, like system-sized bear traps, ready to snap shut on us. Okay, now you've got my attention. What kind of traps are we talking about?
One classic example is the tragedy of the commons. You familiar with that one?
Vaguely. It's like, if everyone takes too much, there's nothing left for anyone.
Exactly. It's when a shared resource gets completely depleted because everyone's acting in their own self-interest, but ultimately it harms everyone in the long run. Think overfishing. Each fisherman thinks, a few more fish won't hurt. But multiply that by hundreds, thousands, and suddenly, well, there's no fish left for anyone.
So it's like the opposite of that whole rising tide lifts all boats idea.
Precisely. And then there's the fixes the fail trap, which is a big one. This one's all about our love affair with those quick fixes, those Band-Aid solutions. We see a problem, we slap on a Band-Aid solution, feel relieved for a minute, but then that Band-Aid falls off, the problem's back, and often it's even worse than before.
Oof, yeah, this one hits close to home. I can think of a few temporary solutions I've tried that, well, let's just say they didn't work out as planned. So how do we break free from this cycle? How do we avoid these traps and actually start creating lasting change?
Meadows argues that the key is to shift our focus from battling symptoms to understanding the underlying system itself. It's about seeing the bigger picture, the interconnectedness of it all. And one of the most powerful ways to do that is by identifying leverage points.
Leverage points, meaning those spots where even a small intervention can create a huge ripple effect. Tell me more about these leverage points.
Imagine a seesaw, right? A little push at the right point can lift a much heavier weight. Leverage points are like those strategic spots in a system. They're where our efforts have the most impact, where we can get the most bang for our buck, so to speak.
So instead of just reacting to whatever the system throws our way, we can actually become like system designers, using those levers to nudge things in a more positive direction. Okay, that's pretty empowering. But how do we even find those points? How do we know where to focus our energy?
Meadows outlines a whole hierarchy of leverage points, from the least to most impactful. At the base level, you have things like physical stocks and flows. Think, changing the number of fish in a lake or adjusting interest rates. Those can be helpful, but often they just shift the problem around rather than actually solving it.
It's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, right?
Right.
Maybe it looks a little better, but it doesn't change the fact that the ship's still sinking.
Exactly. So to create real change, we need to move up the hierarchy to those higher leverage points.
Okay, so where do we find those more impactful leverage points? The ones that actually address the root causes, not just the symptoms.
As we move up the hierarchy, we get to things like feedback loops. Remember our runaway snowball?
Yeah, that's hard to forget.
What if we could change the shape of the hill itself? Make it less steep so the snowball doesn't gain as much momentum? That's intervening at the level of feedback, and it can make a world of difference.
Okay, so instead of just trying to stop the snowball, we're reshaping the system that's making it grow in the first place. What are some other high leverage spots Meadows highlights? Where else can we, hack the system for good?
One of the most fascinating is the power of information flows.
Information flows, like who has access to what information and how is that information being presented?
Exactly. Meadows found that even subtle changes in how we frame information can dramatically alter behavior.
We touched on this earlier with those Dutch electricity meters. Just making energy use visible led to a huge drop in consumption. It's like once people could see the system at work, they were more mindful of their own role within it.
Exactly. There's another great example Meadows gives about reducing smoking. For years, campaigns focused on individual behavior. Quit smoking, it's bad for you. But what really shifted the system was when information about the dangers of secondhand smoke became more widespread.
So it became less about personal choice and more about the impact on others.
Exactly. Suddenly, smoking wasn't just a personal health issue, it was a public health issue. That shift in information led to smoking bans in public places, restrictions on advertising, a whole cascade of changes at a societal level.
Wow. Okay, I'm convinced. Information is power. But it's also about how we wield that power, how we frame the narrative around it. What are some other high leverage areas Meadows talks about? What else can we do to create those kinds of ripple effects?
Even more powerful than information flows, believe it or not, are the rules of the system itself. And I'm not just talking about laws and regulations, although those are important, but also the unspoken rules, the norms, the incentives that shape how people behave.
Okay, so we're talking about those unwritten rules of like how things really work, right? The stuff
Mhm.
that's not always spelled out but makes a huge difference in how people behave.
Exactly. And Meadows argues that by changing these rules, whether they're formal or informal, we can actually transform a system's trajectory. It's like changing the DNA of the system itself.
Okay, that's a powerful image. But can you give us a concrete example? What's a real-world scenario where tweaking those rules led to a dramatic shift?
Imagine for a moment a college where instead of professors giving grades, the students grade the professors.
Whoa, talk about turning the tables.
Right. Or picture a university with no degrees.
Hmm.
People just come and go as their interests and needs evolve. Just by changing those fundamental rules of engagement, you'd radically alter the whole learning environment.
It would completely change the power dynamics, the incentives, the whole vibe of the place.
Precisely. And that's the point. Rules aren't just about maintaining order. They're about shaping behavior, influencing what's valued, what's possible within that system.
This reminds me of what you said earlier about how we often get stuck battling symptoms without ever addressing the root causes. It's like with rules, we have the potential to rewrite the system's DNA.
That's a great analogy. And it leads us to what Meadows considers the highest leverage point of all paradigms.
Paradigms. Okay, that sounds kind of intimidating. Are we talking about like complex scientific theories or something?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
In this context, a paradigm is simply a set of beliefs or assumptions about how the world works. It's the lens through which we see everything.
So paradigms are like those deeply ingrained mental models, the stories we tell ourselves that influence our every choice and action.
Exactly. Meadows argues that shifting these paradigms, these fundamental ways of seeing, is often the key to unlocking truly transformative change. It's like upgrading the operating system of our minds.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you even begin to shift something as deeply ingrained as a paradigm? I mean, it's not like you can just snap your fingers and suddenly see the world in a whole new light, right?
Of course not. Paradigm shifts are rarely easy or quick. They require us to challenge our assumptions, question our beliefs, and be open to seeing the world from different perspectives. And often, it's the unexpected events, the crises, that shake us out of our comfortable paradigms.
It's like that saying, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. Sometimes it takes a bit of chaos to create the space for a new order to emerge.
That's a great way to put it. Meadows argues that those moments of disruption, while challenging, can be incredible opportunities for growth and transformation. It's during those times that we're most open to new ideas, new ways of being.
So it's about embracing those moments of uncertainty and asking ourselves, what if? What if this is an opportunity to create something better than what we had before?
Precisely. Meadows encourages us to approach those moments with curiosity, humility, and a willingness to let go of old paradigms that no longer serve us.
So it's not about having all the answers, it's about being brave enough to ask better questions.
Exactly. And one of the most powerful questions we can ask ourselves is, what are the leverage points within this system? Where can I apply my energy and attention to create the biggest positive impact?
It's about becoming like system detectives,
Yeah.
looking for those pressure points where a small nudge can create a cascade of change.
I love the system detectives. And here's the thing. Meadows suggests that the most effective leverage points are often not the ones that seem most obvious.
Okay, so less blowing up the system and more like gentle acupuncture for complex systems.
Exactly. It's about working with the system's natural dynamics, not against them. And one of the most powerful ways to do that is by paying attention to what Meadows calls the soft variables.
Soft variables. Okay, now you've piqued my curiosity. What are those and why are they so important?
These are the things that are often hard to measure, but have a huge impact on how a system functions. Things like trust, relationships, shared values, even things like beauty and a sense of belonging.
Ah, so it's not just about the numbers, the data points, but also about the human element, the often intangible things that make a system thrive or falter.
Exactly. Our culture tends to fixate on what's easily quantifiable: GDP, profit margins, test scores. But those metrics don't tell the whole story. They don't capture the nuances of human experience.
Right. And I imagine that overlooking those softer variables could lead to solutions that look good on paper, but don't actually address the underlying needs of the system.
Precisely. Think about a company that's solely focused on maximizing profits. They might implement all sorts of efficiency measures, streamline processes, even cut costs by reducing staff. All in the name of boosting those numbers, right?
Yeah. But in doing so, they might end up creating a terrible work environment.
Exactly. They might inadvertently erode employee morale, stifle creativity, and ultimately undermine their own long-term success.
That's the classic penny wise, pound foolish scenario. They're
Yeah.
so fixated on one metric that they miss the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that's why Meadows stresses the importance of honoring those soft variables, even if they're difficult to measure. It's about recognizing that quality, equity, well-being, these aren't just nice-to-haves. They're essential ingredients for a thriving system, whether it's a company, a community, or an entire planet.
This reminds me of something you said earlier about how systems thinking is about asking better questions. So, if we're trying to honor those softer, less tangible aspects of a system, what are some questions we should be asking?
Instead of just asking, how can we make this more efficient,
Yeah.
or how can we maximize output, we might also ask, how can we make this more equitable? How can we foster a greater sense of belonging? Or how can we create a system that promotes well-being for all of its members?
Those questions signal a real shift in perspective. It's less about like squeezing every last drop out of the system and more about creating a system that works for everyone.
Exactly. And that's the essence of Meadows' message. Systems thinking isn't just about understanding complex dynamics. It's about using that understanding to create a better world. It's about recognizing that we are the system, and we have the power to shape it with our choices and our actions.
This deep dive has been honestly mind-blowing. Meadows' work, it's both challenging and hopeful at the same time. It reminds us that we're not just cogs in the machine. We have the power to influence the systems that shape our lives.
I love that. We're not just cause. And, Meadows reminds us that even small changes can make a difference. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being willing to experiment, to learn and adapt as we go.
So it's about embracing curiosity, being okay with failing sometimes, and realizing that we're all in this together, right?
Absolutely. None of us can do this alone. We need each other's insights, support, and collaboration. We need to share our experiences, our successes, and our failures. Because that's how we learn, that's how we grow, and that's how we create a better future.
This has been an incredible conversation. Meadows' work is a powerful reminder that we're all interconnected and that our actions, no matter how small, can have a ripple effect. It's up to all of us to use these insights to create a more just, sustainable, and fulfilling world for everyone.
I couldn't agree more. And, Meadows herself said it best. We can't control systems or figure them out, but we can dance with them. So let's get out there and start dancing.